My name is Mimi O'Malley. I have seen many of you already in some presentations. I am a professional development administrator here at the Learning House, and this particular role is in charge of administering and working with our instructors for our BP courses, which are best practices courses that help train and deliver online course delivery for our client schools. Right now I'm working with rewriting and updating with current research many of these best practice courses, which include BP 101, BP 102, and BP 103. I am going to go ahead and introduce our session today is Becoming an Online Instructor. And we're going to devote the next hour to a panel discussion to discuss really the key skills and attributes and behaviors for becoming an online instructor. And I do have three panelists with me that I'd like to introduce to you. The first one is Harry Carroll. And Harry is the chairman of the Department of Mass Communication, and he's an instructor in public relations for Missouri Valley College. He has taught at both the high school and college level, and Harry's married with one son. Next to Harry is Dr. Susan Irwood, who is the director of the graduate education programs at Shorter University in Rome, Georgia. Susan received her Doctor of Education degree in school improvement from the University of West Georgia and an education specialist degree from West Georgia College. Dr. Irwood earned a Master of Arts degree in school counseling from Appalachia State University and a Bachelor of Arts in English and Theater Arts from Lenoir Rhine College, and I hope I pronounced that right. Didn't quite get it, little sir? All right. She previously served as an adjunct instructor at Shorter's Riverdale campus and as a school counselor and graduation coach at Whitewater Middle School in Fayetteville. Lastly, we have as our panelist Mark Simpson. And Dr. Simpson teaches at Oakland City University and is a certified online instructor. He has been a professor and administrator of online learning and accelerated degree programs for more than 20 years, including at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, Rockbridge Seminary, and Clear Creek Baptist Bible College. In addition to teaching, Dr. Simpson has published several journal articles, is the webmaster for the Online Common Ground Journal, and is the e-publisher of the journal for the Can Do It Spirit Network. He received his BA from Spring Arbor College, his MACE from Denver Seminary, and his MA from DePaul University, and that's DePaul with the W, not the L, and his PhD from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Thank you all for coming and joining us. A little bit about how this session will probably run. I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of background about some research that's been developed on this particular topic of online instructor readiness. And then I'm actually going to open up and ask our panelists at least two questions and let them respond to it, and certainly engage you all into further questions regarding those initial questions being posted. Again, I'm going to eventually hand this mic over to my colleague, Kathleen Hausman, who will be out in the audience and will walk around with this mic. If you have any questions, raise your hand, and she will bring the mic over to you so that you can ask questions to our panelists. So first things first, let's go ahead and look at what has been currently said in the literature on this particular topic. And if I get, all right. The Southern Regional Education Board in 2009, and some of you may be familiar with this particular agency, it's a 16-member state nonprofit organization, and it focuses on improvement in the public pre-K to 12 and higher education fields. They identified three prominent qualifications that define quality online instruction. And academic preparation is one of the most important. and you all, seems to be pretty much a no-brainer. Instructors must earn the credentials and continually update their pedagogical skills in their subject area. The SREB and INACOL, and some of you may be familiar with that. INACOL is another nonprofit K through 12 advocacy organization. And not only do they look at the importance of an instructor's understanding and demonstrating knowledge in online learning methodology, but they also looked into the role of online management, knowledge, skills, and even online instructors' delivery methods in their studies. The medical field has been particularly strong in examining online instructor readiness. And there are two studies, one in Canada and one in Iran, that really looked at online instructor readiness succinctly. The first one in Canada, the Canadian study actually examined the experiences of 9 medical instructors who were transitioning from the face-to-face platform to the online. The Iranian study examined the readiness of 60 medical faculty who again were transitioning from face-to-face and including more e-technology into their online medical courses. And what both studies actually came to was a conclusion that their skills of technical competency, facilitation, and interaction were one of the key skills that an online instructor will need to be ready for and prepared for. And these somewhat correlate with the SREB and INACOL's results as well. So what I want to go ahead and ask our panelists and our audience too is, what challenges do you or did you face when mastering the technological aspects for online instruction?
I'll go first. Somebody has to go first, so that I don't. I'm going to give you, this is my visual. This is my cell phone. All right, and most of you know cell phones. I am technologically challenged, and when they talked to me about teaching online classes, I about panicked. In reference to some of the things that she said, academic prep was no problem as far as I was concerned, and online management and delivery methods have gotten better as I've gone. This is going to be my 3rd year of teaching online. But the technical competency was the one thing that challenged me more than anything else. Being unfamiliar with the Moodle, being unfamiliar with that platform. And I really think, as I look at some of the people that I work with as far as teaching online classes, that this is an absolute challenge. Lucky, very, very lucky, I took the best practices classes one after the other. I did all the Moodle tutorials, and I have I've had 3. I guess I wear them out. Reps here at Learning House where I call up and I've got their numbers on speed dial and say this thing doesn't work. But that's an absolute fact that the technological thing was the most challenging for me. There were some other things that I hope I'll get to talk about later that I found challenging, but that was the first one for me.
I'll say that we use Moodle on our campus for our on-ground courses. And so I started out using Moodle in my classes, and I felt pretty safe technologically. I did not always understand Moodle, but I felt like I had a little bit of an understanding of it. So I knew what I could use in my online courses as far as how they could upload things, and but I still haven't grasped the gradebook. I have a problem with that, and there are some other things that I don't know that are available. And when you go through all these courses, and I keep this in mind when I hire new instructors to teach, when you go through all these courses, you get all this information, but it's hard, you don't understand it till you use it. And so when they're going through all of this, and then all of a sudden they're in a course, then it's so important to have that support, and it was so important for me to have that support or know somebody to call or to make sure I could get an answer on the help desk. So technology, I felt like I knew what I was doing, but when it came right down to it, and you had to do some other things and teach, and in addition to keeping up with Moodle, that was a challenge.
Well, I guess for me, I've been fortunate in that I was born a geek, and I read tech manuals for fun. So actually, when I got started in online learning, I had, when I was at Southern Seminary back in the 90s, I started learning how to write web pages in Microsoft Front Page, and then eventually learned to code by hand, and took a lot of courses on how to use software and things. And so I used those skills to develop online courses using web pages. When I was hired by a different employer and we started using Moodle, I realized that some of the skills that I had could transfer, but not necessarily all of them. So it meant taking time to look at the free material that's online with Moodle, which are very helpful, the user forums especially. Whenever I'd run into tech questions about how does a feature work, and plus they had a free book, so that was right up my alley. I could download that. I think the main challenges that I see instructors have, and that I had initially, was understanding how HTML works, because you can go into Moodle and you can type out some content, but if you want to format it a little bit, sometimes Moodle gets touchy, and so you click that code view, and if you just know very basic HTML, that everything starts and ends with a tag, you can fix things yourself pretty easy. And so that was a tech challenge. And the one with Moodle that just irritates me to no end is if you copy and paste from Microsoft Word, it throws a lot of extra code in there unless you click that little Word icon and get it to delete it. So I eventually just stopped using Word to write stuff. I just do it in a text document, and then eliminated all of that kind of stuff, and then formatted it in Moodle.
Well, everything he said is what I don't understand. So
I started to take notes, but I lost you right there. So.
I was just going to say, I hope none of you feel intimidated by that, because I would if I were an instructor. So let's open it up to questions.
Good, that means we can go home.
Don't be shy.
Yes, I do. Okay. Are we expected to use code and there's a lot of pieces of Moodle that, you know, the little line of things that you can adjust or use, and I just do the ones that I absolutely have to, but are you using all of them, and what do they do was the question.
the more I teach, and this is my first year I had never taken an online course. I had never taught an online course. And so the more I taught this year, and this was the first year I'd done it, I found a little bit more on Moodle, like things would show up on the side there, and I go, oh, okay, I can try that. Where I don't know, there was something that showed up just recently that you've got an assignment to grade. And I thought, okay, I need to talk on that, okay. I thought I was pretty loud, but okay. But I thought, but the more I use Moodle, the more I find there's things that can help. But like I said before, I think it's just the experience of doing it is going to help me as an instructor. I don't think you can know everything right at the beginning and be expected to use everything. And that's what I need to also understand about instructors that we've hired and that we're trying to train, is that they can't be expected to know everything right at the beginning. At least I'm hoping nobody thinks I know it all.
No, because actually that's exactly right. When I created the template that the Learning House uses for our classes, one of the things that I tried to do deliberately was design for the lowest common denominator in terms of keeping it as simple as possible and basically encouraging instructors to design their documents in Word and PowerPoint or Excel, which they probably already do, and then allow the Learning House to format and put it into the classroom as needed. I know we need to move more into audio and video kinds of things like YouTube and stuff, but I haven't really done much of that myself because it does tend to get a little bit more tech difficult for faculty who struggle with just making word work. But I do find that by keeping the classroom design simple, that's really helped faculty to feel comfortable. And as with any software, as you all know, the more you use it, the more you pick up on features. And suddenly, on day one where you're scared to use it, you know, by the end of the term, you're using extra bells and whistles, and you use them the next time. And that tends to help faculty a lot.
I will say I've tried to use the iPad, and there's some things I've pulled up with lectures that I can't read, that I can't read the lecture. So I wonder sometimes about if students are able to, if they're using an iPad, whether they're able to read the lecture or some other things on the course.
I just wanted to dovetail on this question because I had, in the 3 years our school's been with Learning House, when we first got started, the president of our college, we signed with Learning House and they said, we want you to have basically a course online with Learning House offered to our students in a week and a half. I'm not kidding. So we took one of the off-the-shelf courses, I don't know what you call them at Learning House, library courses. And there was not time really to send things into Learning House and have them do their work. And so I did the tags and HTML, and it isn't that hard to do bold and the different kinds of fonts and italic. It's not that hard and everything. But when we did the post-mortem on that, the Learning House representatives and the people I was working with, who were very helpful, but they just couldn't turn around that quick. They kind of politely slapped me around and said, let us do that. And I really would let you do it. It's not that hard, but Learning House does it just so much better and quicker and prettier and all that. So just wanted to share that experience.
Thanks for that plug. We will help you do it. You don't have to do it on your own.
I'd like to put in a plug for two things. First of all, the master course idea, where you have one course and then your adjunct instructors or whoever instructing have a grader role only, where they can only go in and grade things so that they're not actually monkeying around with what's there. Everybody gets the same experience that way, and there's much less damage to control for. And the other thing is document, because when you change things, then you go back a semester later and you're like, oh yeah, I need to do that again. How did I do that the last time? Mm-hmm. So document.
I'd just like to know how many people are requiring anything other than the MT 101 course. Is anyone requiring the best practices courses in order to teach initially, or maybe after you've taught, say 3 times, you can't teach anymore until you do another level of instruction with Learning House?
Actually, let me ask you to raise your hands if you require all of MT 101 at your school before an instructor can teach. How about if you require also BP 101? Okay. Would anyone like to answer her question more specifically?
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that no one should be teaching, and I don't know, you might come in and be already ready, but BP 101, BP 102, and the Moodle tutorials, and we do require them now of our faculty before they start teaching online. I suppose we could waive it if somebody came in like my gentleman to the right down here. But no, we require BP 101 basically, and the Moodle tutorials. And as a graduate of all of them, then I'm 100% behind that.
I just have a comment about what everybody is saying. I thought I knew online education because I came from a place that used Blackboard. There are no similarities between Blackboard and Moodle. And I always thought Blackboard was really cool, and it doesn't have a percentage of the flexibility and, I guess, power that Moodle has. Whoever wrote that program is beyond me. Thank you.
One of the things that I'm trying this fall, this will be an experiment, so maybe I can tell you how it works next year, but I'm actually preparing now with the Learning House a course called Teaching and Learning in the Online Classroom for Oakland City University. And what we're thinking of doing is offering that to the faculty, and that will give me a chance to train faculty in the classroom design that we've set up for our students. What I've found is that faculty tend to respond better to faculty sometimes in the training process than if you had someone else. And so, because it gives us a chance to encourage one another. And then we're hoping that by having that experience and actually having the course experience with the subject matter that relates to what they're doing in the online classroom, giving them tips and techniques will help them. So next year I'll let you know how it goes.
One of the things I would suggest is just as soon as I knew I was going to be teaching online courses, I started taking online courses. We learn by imitation. And those instructors that did things that I liked, I tried to immediately incorporate them. And those instructors, and they are out there, let me tell you, who log in once every 3 months or something like that. And they set the standard for me to say that'll never happen as far as I'm concerned. So, I think you need to take online courses as a student to understand how you teach an online course.
I have a question. For those of you who do require training, I think you mentioned that you did. Do you compensate your faculty for that training process? And
We do,
You do? And
but only if they complete all of it, not just
Okay.
one course. They've got to take all the Moodle and
right,
all
because
the,
that is a time investment, I'm assuming. And if you're talking about a lot of adjuncts teaching online, then that's another issue for them. They kind of want to come in, come out instead of, have that training.
We don't at this point in time compensate. Maybe I'll go back to them, you got to pay me more.
Would you share what the compensation is, just ballpark?
I'm trying to, I hate to even say because I don't remember. I don't know if it's not a whole lot. It might be either $300 or $500 to take the whole, all of it. And the Moodle courses.
That's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
But I want that versus door prizes.
Right, yeah, it's not a door prize.
For those of you who do have faculty who take those courses, the faculty members who do pass do get a certificate, and it's also noted
Mhm.
in Braille, so there is a backup there as well, so you know
Who's
did
doing it.
pass
Yeah.
versus who did fail it.
We,
One of the questions I wanted to throw out to panelists and even the audience
Is it going to be as long as the first one?
No. And some of you have already addressed this, is what resources do you keep in your little toolbox to help you when you need to troubleshoot some LMS, file formatting, and even copyright issues when you're uploading material for those of you who have editing rights to your course? Who are your campus sources that you usually rely on, or non-campus sources, when you have some technology issues and you need those quick, ready answers answered?
I just go through our help desk, and that's basically who I use. We also have a person on our campus who's very good with Moodle. She's sort of our expert, and so I will go to her too. You just have to find those people that you feel comfortable with and that you know will pick up the phone or respond to your emails when you ask.
I'd say the same thing. I've learned to trust the IT department. They learn to trust me because I respect what they have to do, which I think is important to develop that relationship with them. And then, as I said, using the Moodle forums to look for what other users are saying, because a lot of times they'll give you step-by-step help, which tends to help you if you run into a problem. That's basically how I've tackled it.
Yeah, I answered it earlier. I've got Learning House on speed dial, and they've been great. Of course, I've gone through 3 CSSs, so that might be one of the reasons they keep moving me around. But I probably end up calling them once or twice a week.
And I have Googled.
Yeah.
I'll go to Google sometimes if I just, see if I can find an answer.
Another place to look for answers too, in light of that, is to go to YouTube. It's amazing how many other faculty will make little video clips of how to do this stuff, and I learn more that way sometimes than even the Moodle forums.
When I started teaching for Laurel University through y'all, all they did at Laurel was say, be sure you get in touch with Learning House. So I did, and y'all really
Good
took care of
advice.
me, and took care of me quickly, because it was a kind of a last-minute deal. I now teach for another school besides Laurel. I'm still teaching for Laurel, who still use y'all. This other school uses Moodle, but not through y'all. But because of the training I've gotten with y'all, I'm able to kind of take care of myself with them.
Another Southern American town.
Now that I know that Mark and I worked at Southern Seminary together, and you know, Mark is the kind that, you know, for a hobby, for fun, he'll develop programs that help other people at the seminary. So he helped us with online class, class scheduling and stuff. So now, if I can't get y'all, I'll be calling Mark, now that I know that he's on Moodle too. So.
My cell phone died on the way here.
Yeah.
Guess what's
Yeah.
not going to get fixed?
It'll be okay again.
Are you passing out your number?
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next topic, and this is more in line of facilitation and interaction. And I know some of you were starting to lead in that direction earlier. What challenges did our panelists have or had when you were adopting your face-to-face classroom facilitation and interaction strategies into your online class?
I better not start. I could talk for an hour on that. That was a huge challenge for me. I've 46 years in the classroom, and to be honest, it's been fairly successful. And then I was instructed to bring my face-to-face classes to online classes, and they were supposed to come over intact. I was supposed to be doing the same exact thing with my that I do my face-to-face classes to my online classes. Now, I told them when they put me up here, I'd only be honest. I don't think that's possible. It's apples and it's pears. I have some apple trees and I have some pear trees. They bloom at different times. I harvest them at different times. I still want them all to go to one place. I still want them all to end up as apple butter or pear butter or in a fruit salad somewhere. But it's just not the same. And I have had to, each time I've gone, I keep the same learning objectives. You can't get away from that. I keep the same learning objectives, but how I get my students to the end differs tremendously from what I do in a face-to-face class to what I do in an online class. And one of the challenges, one of the challenges I had is I'm a hands-on teacher in the classroom. I got away from lectures before they wrote the book, teaching with keeping your mouth shut when you teach. And I kept saying, how am I going to get this to happen in the classroom where I have the students, you know, interacting with me? And that was a huge challenge the first year. I believe I'm coming close to mastering it now. I've taken that forum, which I had no idea even how it worked the first time I taught an online class. I've turned that into class discussion. For example, right now I'm teaching an introduction to mass communication class, and I typed up a prompt the other day, and I gave them a list of the AFI, American Film Institute's top 100 films, and I said, tell me the film that got left off that you think ought to be on here. Boy, I've had like Dumb and Dumber and The Wedding Crasher, and I just let them go, and they're talking back and forth to each other. I keep hoping one of them will put Napoleon Dynamite out there so I can jump in and start screaming and hollering and tell them they owe me my money back from the time they talked me into watching that class. But that is substituting now for what I used to call my class participation, and it's not quite as good. I'll be real honest, it's not quite as good, but it's starting to work for me. Yeah. Uh-oh.
Speaking to class participation, how do you feel like you know that online student? How do you require photos? Do you require Skype, YouTube? How do you picture?
The very first thing I do is I tell them they have to fill out their profile, And the second thing I tell them they have to do in my class, and I learned it from a workshop here somewhere, is I tell them your first forum entry is going to be discussion of the syllabus and anything you don't understand and introducing yourself to me. And you know, I was telling some of you out there earlier, like I've got 2 students. I've been crazy today to get back on the computer. I got a student about to have a baby. I guess she didn't do the last assignment, so she's probably having a baby. And I've got a student out in Paraguay who's traveling with an international soccer team, and her last 2 emails to me. I do a lot of email. I email back and forth. I go online frequently, you know, 4, 5, 6 times a day. And she says, I can't get the email, internet stuff to work here in Paraguay. I don't know what I'll do with the assignments. And that's exciting to me, though. I mean, that's connection with that student. I'm sorry, I'm back. Huh? I've got some that did not put a photo on, and I keep encouraging them to, but I don't, you know, scream and holler if they don't have the photo on. But after a while, because as I'm individually emailing with the individual students, and I make sure I have an individual dialogue going on the internet with all of my students. And after a while, I get to know them. Some of them won't open up, but I get the same thing in the face-to-face classroom. I get somebody to sit in the back of the classroom, and no matter how I try and draw them in or how I try to reach them, I can't do it. So I did make that transition, and that didn't bother me.
I have a quick question for you.
Okay.
You sound like you get them doing exciting things on that discussion board, and we have a requirement of posting for, I mean, I'll put up a problem or a question,
Yeah.
initial posting to respond to it, and then 2 responding to their colleagues. Boring, sleeping, and what do you do to get them to get hot under the collar? So, I mean, last week we talked about research ethics, and I gave them a voluminous list of the ways you can mess up and inadvertently or on purpose be unethical. And only 1 responded to me sort of lukewarm. The rest of them responded, oh yes, I agree with Charles, and Mary made a good point, and I'm thinking, I could sleep through this.
Yeah.
Usually
Help.
what you have to do with some of that, and this just takes practice with doing the discussions, is ask them back then, why did you agree with this person or disagree? Another technique that I like to use, probably too much, is to play devil's advocate. And I let them know that, because I find that if you don't, they accidentally assume that you believe what you're saying, when really what you want them to do is to think a little bit deeper. But that's usually a good technique. I think one of the hardest things in relationship to this question with online discussions was getting away from asking questions that were closed-ended, yes, no kinds of things, which you can do in a face-to-face classroom, but you can't online, or asking something that does not encourage them to probe deeper, where they could just give a very simple 1 or 2 sentence answer, and then they have nothing to interact with each other. So, and that just takes practice. It means as the instructor, you have to ask yourself, okay, if they answer it, what do I do with it? And what do they do with it? And then sometimes you have to rephrase the very same topic question in a different way that encourages reflection.
I'm big on using rubrics, but I haven't done one for the discussion forum yet. I use rubrics for all of my assignments, but the discussion forum was the most foreign thing to me that I had come across in teaching. I mean, I talk in class and we discuss, but I really didn't understand how that worked, and I'm still learning about it. But as I learned from some of these workshops and talking to people, I think I would like to try a rubric, because I'm used to it, and that's what we use in our program to even, we use rubrics to, to see how to measure our learning outcomes. So I thought, well, that would be a good way to look at discussions. I know it's going to be hard to use a rubric on that, and I'm not real sure how to use it, so if anybody has any good ideas, I'd appreciate it.
I don't require them to respond to each other anymore, because it bored me to tears too. So what I do is and I also changed it the first time. I had no idea when I was doing these forums, and I let them do that forum, and they'd start a topic here, and they'd start a topic there, and then they weren't talking to each other. So I talked to one of the reps here, and I went to what is called a simple discussion. And I'll put the prompt out there, like what film was missing, or I believe Casablanca was the greatest film ever made, and stuff like that. And then I'll follow the discussion on down through. Now, when I was in the classroom, I kind of was the focus and the dominant. I tried not to be that on the forum, but you make a response, I'll probably respond. And then and then one of the things I'm really starting to do now is, I like that, but if you don't give me a specific, I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about. And that seems to work and generate it. So then I can just follow the discussion straight on down all the way through, and I come back up and I look at it, and that's how I follow it. Like this morning, just a few minutes ago, I had about a few minutes to run in there, and I kicked it up there, and I looked at all my forums, and I slid on down to see if anybody had made a forum post, and then if they had did a forum response, sometimes to each other, and the one thing that I do, if I post a question, a response to their forum, and I tell them they don't answer my question, I'm going to assume they're not reading the forum, I'm going to deduct points. So in the middle of the forum, I always try to say, now, Edith, what did you mean by this? And if Edith doesn't come back on, and she didn't, if she doesn't come back on and answer my question in the forum, I'm saying, sorry, you don't get maximum points for this forum, because I want you reading the forums, because I learned that in my best practice. One of the things I learned better in the best practice classes was from the other classmates. When they started talking back and forth and discussing things, and all of a sudden I'm emailing back, say, hey, tell me more about what you're talking about here. So learning from each other.
One of the things that I have done with the discussion forum is always make sure to encourage the students. Even if what they've done is minimal and they can do better, you always get more results if you encourage them to say, what you said was good, but I'd like to hear a little more because I know you've got good ideas. Always phrase things like that, because sometimes you never know if the student is maybe a little bit of hesitant and are scared, and especially students that are struggling with language issues. And so a lot of times I'll do that even like in the comment box for the grade, for the discussion forum for the week. I'll say, I like what you were saying. I would have loved to have heard more because you have good ideas to share. And then the next week, usually you see a little bit more participation. Some students you have to send a separate email to and encourage. The other thing that I've done, and I'd be curious to know how the rest of you respond to this, but I make all of my discussion forums required in the sense that they automatically get the emails. I find that a lot of times, as you know, as you get so busy, time gets away from you, and it does for the student. And so those emails that are saying you've got messages posted gives them a chance to maybe read by email if they are not able to necessarily go online for an extended period of time. And it also prompts them that the discussion is going or that they need to be participating.
I think that works better because I took that off.
I always use it for the first discussion for sure, and then I also create separate discussions. One I call Ask the Professor, which is where I ask them to put all of their questions about assignments, and I discourage them from doing it in the other discussions simply because it would be equivalent to somebody raising their hand in the middle of a class discussion and say, I want to ask you about the assignment. In Ask the Professor, it's always required that they get it by email, because that way I know everybody's heard the same thing I've told the student. And I always try to encourage them early on in an early discussion that there are no dumb questions, they're just dumb answers from me. And that what you're wanting to ask is probably what everybody else wants to ask, they're just afraid to. And so I always make it a point never to say, well, that was a dumb question. Or I'm sorry, what I'd rather do is say, I'm sorry, I must not have made that as clear as I could have. Here's what you need to do. Then everybody hears the same thing. And usually I don't get students being afraid to ask. Another group that I use is a news and announcements, which is in most classrooms. I also make that required. And that's where I post every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times, just to prompt them. Then the discussion forums that way get to remain a little bit more pure to topic. Yeah. And then I always make the first week required. In the past, I've made the others optional, but I find that if I make it required, I tend to get better levels of participation. One that I've tried and have gotten away from is I used to always have a cohort or a classroom cafe where the students could go and could talk about anything else. And it was in the classroom, so it was a chance to just shoot the breeze, tell jokes, and then I would sometimes go in there and share jokes with them and encourage them. And being that we're a faith-based institution, we also allow them to share prayer requests and things like that. And that kind of helps with the dynamics of the classroom too, because it makes them feel like they have connections with each other. What's interesting is when the students then get another class together in another class, they know each other better.
I guess I'm going to speak as a student rather than as a teacher. I don't teach any online classes. I'm earning a degree right now, and about half of my classes are online. And going back to that discussion idea, one of the most frustrating things to me as a student is when I get this discussion question and it's not a discussion question. It is asking me to repeat back something that I have read in the book, and there's no place to go with it. So you have, 15 people all writing the exact same thing, pretty much, and no way to comment on it. The best discussion boards that I've had as a student are those that, first of all, have a question or a comment that can be a discussion, and then asking us specifically to relate it to something personal in our life, or to find an outside source online that maybe corroborates with your idea, or that comment on something that you've read outside that's not part of the curriculum, but to find something online that deals with that so that you have something to comment on, and so everybody's bringing in different material or bringing in something from their own experience. And that, to me as a student, is when I find that online discussion valuable.
Sometimes with the online discussions, you have to go that route in the sense you want the personal feedback, but you also know that students have a tendency to shoot from the hip. They just go online, they read, they just share their opinion, and it's not necessarily an informed one. And so a lot of times what is helpful to do is, like you're suggesting, is to say, go outside and find some other support for your position, or an author that agrees or disagrees with it. And then that helps to encourage the student to get into the content and not just come whatever comes to mind.
To dovetail on where to steer students for finding those outside sources, of course you have Google, but Google does have Google Books and Google Scholar that is a fantastic search tool that is immediate. Of course, I highly recommend you steer them to your campus library resources. I know your institution spent a lot of money on those databases, and this is a great engaging talk to have with your librarian in your subject department to find out if you can have students actually link to articles that they may find in those EBSCOhost, ProQuest, and Gale info tracks, and that they can use those articles as part of their reference to outside resources. I know in the BP classes I've taught, I've noticed I've brought in more outside references, and I include at the bottom where that reference comes from. Number one, it's a great spin-off. I found other students started to do that themselves in their posts. Number two, we're trying to teach our students how to cite properly and part of academic integrity. When they actually see it in a post, it really starts to become more realistic. Oh, that's how you cite APA in a post. So now I can see how I'm going to have to do it in my paper, in my presentation. So you're reinforcing some of those skills you want them to do in their final products, deliverables, assignments. When they see you modeling it in your post, they're going to start to do it in their own post as well. So one, engage yourself in a great conversation with your librarian on campus. I know they've probably been knocking at your door about what books to put in your library. Steer them towards, I want you to tell me what are some good online resources for my students in this particular class. And let them build you what is called in librarian speak a pathfinder, which is basically a bibliography of book, magazine,
resources, databases for your class. And you can upload that right into your class and direct your students to those sources. And that kind of also steers them a little bit away from doing random Google searches that they really don't know, again, what they're pulling out, and they don't have good evaluation skills yet.
Yeah, to respond to what you were talking about earlier, writing open-ended questions or prompts is a challenge, and it's hard work. I was disappointed the session that I thought was going to cover that this afternoon got canceled. What I will do, though, is I will look, and I like to have access to my courses because I'll be tinkering with them right during the year. And if I'm going through here and I have a prompt that did not generate the kind of discussion that I wanted, I figure I did something wrong, and I immediately go back and look at it. There are at least 2 prompts in one of my classes this year that I've already rewritten. You know, once I closed it out, I went back and rewrote it and reworded it. Said, that did not work. That was a disaster. I mean, I have disasters in my face-to-face classes too. But the great thing about a face-to-face class, I walk in and I got the class going and it's a disaster. I can change directions immediately and go to something else or start telling war stories, you know, anything along those lines. But can't do that online. You're kind of restricted, and you've thrown it out there. That's all the students know. That's all they can run with. So I really spend a lot of time trying to make sure that my graded response and my prompt questions are as good as I can make them, and I'm working on them, you know, constantly.
One of the things to do too, if you find in a discussion that you realize this isn't working the way you wanted it to or hoped it would, to just create another discussion. Don't try to start a new one in the existing group, because it just confuses them.
I've done that.
But it just, and then you just politely make it seem like that was what you intended all along. Because one of the things that happens is if a student assumes that you are not in control of what you're doing, then they lose confidence in you. So just say, well, we've kind of handled this question enough for now. Let's move on to this one. And then steer them in another direction. And the reality is, too, as you all know from teaching in traditional face-to-face, what doesn't work in one classroom does in another, and vice versa. So it may be that it's not a bad question, it was just the group dynamics didn't make it go together well.
I had more just a couple of comments. For our program, I work with the instructors for the MBA program at Cal Lutheran University, and we have a weekly live chat session. We use Adobe Connect, which the Learning House has been really, I think they contract with them. And the students and instructor will log in to this live chat session for 60 to 90 minutes, and there's breakout rooms. So the instructor can hit a button and it'll separate, 3 to 5 students into one room, and that really helps with the interaction between the students. And then they can separate, chat amongst themselves, and then regroup and talk about what they discussed within these smaller groups as if they were in a classroom. And then another, to touch off the library resources, during these live chats we'll have our library specialists come in and do a presentation on researching databases all online. So he's logging in from California. We have students all over the country, and he's using Adobe Connect to do a virtual presentation on how to, research resources in the library.
We have cohorts together for 5 semesters, and we try to teach them a way of working on the discussion board that will hold throughout all their classes. Initially, we had tried some basic responses that didn't work well. We asked them to do a probing question. We asked them to challenge. Well, they didn't like to challenge each other because mostly they're teachers, and they're like, well, that's mean. And they didn't, and so they would say, well, I probed Jeffrey, which is just weird. So we came up with 6 basic ways to collaborate on a discussion board. They can share a professional resource, they can share a professional opinion, they can share a personal or professional experience, they can take a stand on an issue, they can weave, which is to summarize the discussion to that point and then ask a leading question of the group, and then they can build community by starting with, I agree with what you said about, because, because we really want to discourage those "you go girl" responses. We do require that they support their stuff. They have to use at least 3 of the 6 different in any one discussion board. In responding to each other, they have to support their statements with citations from course materials or outside materials. And then we also provide them stems, multiple stems for each one of those different kinds of things, so that they at least have a jumping off point. They don't have to use the stems, but it gives them a place to start.
There's someone up here.
I wanted to ask first what that resource was that you said that you used for the chats in the breakout rooms.
It's Adobe Connect.
Okay.
And the Learning House, I think, partners with Adobe Connect.
Okay.
If you ask your client service specialist about Adobe Connect, they will give more information, or your course designer.
Okay. And just to talk about the library, I'm a librarian who was asked several years ago when we got Blackboard to provide training for the campus. And this was a great vehicle for me to also help and assist with library resources. Because when I would go and do the Blackboard training, I would also ask beforehand and talk to the professor and see, do you think it would be all right for me to also include library resources? And they were fine with that as long as I could keep it in the time limits. I think that's the biggest challenge is time, because there is so little of it, and so that's a big challenge. And then I ran across a book in some research I was doing that talked about creating a community of learners, and it's by, I believe it's Phyllis Paloff, and Keith Pratt, and they have done a lot on creating a social environment. They talked about the cyber cafe that was mentioned earlier. So they have some great books, and there's some articles too. And I think rubrics really do help because they give the students some guidelines. And I've taught just web augmented courses. I've never taught a fully online course. I probably will. I think I'm going to be doing that soon. But I had to add 4 hours to each week, because this was an adult accelerated program. We were mandated by the U.S. Department of Education to do that. So I chose to use the forums. And you really have to be specific, because, I mean, some of my students thought if they wrote 2 sentences, that was a response, and that wasn't. So I told them exactly how many sentences they had to write and what guidelines they had to meet. And I wanted to encourage them to develop professional writing skills and encourage that as well, so I emphasize that to them. But I think if you'll have those rubrics, they can be very, very helpful, and that's what's great. And having the different types of discussion boards is great too, which we never had in Blackboard.
The resources by Paloff and Pratt were for a long time some of the standards in the field. I was actually looking to see if they'd written anything new. They're pretty much now just updating older works, but they're still worth it to read because they really lay it out nice and clean and simple. When I did the Certified Online Instructor course, they used the work by Susan Coe, though that one is much more technical. I really like the Pratt and Paloff materials. One of the things with the discussions we haven't talked about is brevity. As you know, as the instructor, you get some students that will talk forever. And unfortunately, my first online program experiences were with doctoral students. And so I ended up creating what I call the 4x4 rule, which is 4 paragraphs of no more than 4 lines each. Because when you talk about word count, we don't always know what that means when you have a little box to type in. So, but they can tell if they got 4 paragraphs and they have 4 lines. And then I had to add to the rule for the doctoral students, you couldn't post multiple posts in succession to violate the rule. And it really made a big difference. And one of the things in doing that, it forces students to think about what they're going to say. And the other is we live in a society where everything is online anymore, and brevity is so important because we scan what we read. And so it had a byproduct effect of encouraging them to learn to write clearly and concisely. And then the students that do well, I agree with what you say, well, 1 sentence paragraphs is pretty obvious you're not saying anything of value and substance.
I know we are getting down to about the last 5 minutes, and I just want to pose out one more just kind of commentary or a question to the panelists and even open it up to you. our audience members. We've talked a lot about those students who are in the class posting. How do you go about and reaching those students who maybe haven't participated, the missing students, the ones who haven't turned in that assignment weeks 1 and 2? What tactics or techniques do you all suggest to audience, or audience, any techniques or strategies you have used for online students who don't participate?
I've emailed, and if I can't get responses that way, I will call them and call them and call them. And I've got one student I never could get a hold of, and I really wondered what happened to her. That's the frustrating part of teaching online, because I do connect with my students, and if something's happened to them and they just disappear, it's kind of scary to me. But I guess if the phone and email are basically what I do.
One of the things when you start a course is to go into the participant list and then click on each student and then use their email address and say something very short, very quick. Hey, I see you're from so-and-so according to your profile. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Or a lot of times it'll be someplace you know about and that you make connections that way. And then it opens the door for the student to be able to tell you when they're not online, or when you notice that they're missing, to go back and try to make that contact and say, I noticed you haven't been online. Are you okay? And I usually phrase it that way rather than be accusatory, because then it lets them know that you are concerned about them. You know, where are you? Are you all right? And it's amazing how many times a student is having some sort of tragedy in their life, and then they'll open up to you, and it gives you a chance to work with them and encourage them further.
I essentially do the same thing. I'll start with email, and once you get them get the email off, you know, so it's the private email, I guess is what you call it. Then you've got them in the system, and then you can talk to them individually. I will call. I will inform the administrator, and then this is, I guess it's just telling on myself here. At some point in time, I give up, because I have a failure rate with my online classes that is, compared to my face-to-face classes, is astronomically high, in my opinion. We have so many kids who just log on and then just disappear. And I think it might just be unique for our school, because we're just getting started and the students we're dealing with. But, you know, I've failed one student the last 2 years in my face-to-face classes. I can go in a dorm and grab them by the neck and drag them into the classroom. And I can't do that online. So, you know, I try the call, I try the email, I call the administrator, and then, frankly, I've got students I'm more concerned about. You know, the girl who's pregnant, I'm still worried about her right now, and the girl in Paraguay, I hope she gets out of there. You know, and another student, I can't mention why I'm concerned about him.
One idea is to check Facebook, because sometimes, yeah, they may be on Facebook, and you might be able to contact them that way.
I never thought about that.
It's also a good way to confirm whether what they told you is the same thing.
The first email I send out, the first contact I have with my students is send me a phone number where I can reach you. And then we have a weekly, only it ends up not being weekly, conference call. And I'm going to start using Adobe Connect. I didn't know about that till this time, but we've been using freeconference.com. You can call in to a non-800 number, so you have to do it when your students have long distance. And then they put in a 6-digit code, and you're all connected. But it's hard to, if you've got a talkative class, which some of them might have been very talkative, then it's hard to get some of them quiet so the quiet ones can speak. But I find that most students like having that conference call. They're not graded on it. They're graded on whether they show up for the call or not. So if they don't show up for the calls, they get points deducted. But if they show up, I don't care what they say. I want them to feel like they can say anything and not have the stress of, if I don't put this right, am I going to get points off? And then they get to know each other that way. The other thing I do on each week, I do 2 discussion forums. The first one, they have to interact with the material. So it is kind of, all of them are answering in the same, pretty much the same way. But the second forum is an observation/reflection. It's 2-part. they have to write down in 250 words or less, but some of them take that to the extreme in one sentence, of things they observe in the material covered for that week. And then the second one, the reflections, is how does that affect you? Does it apply to your life? You know, how do you interact with that in the 21st century? And they seem to respond well to that, but the main thing that helps me get to know them and be able to check on them is having that phone number and talking to them every week or maybe every 2 weeks.
We have one more minute for probably one more question, and then I wanted to ask how much of a print file you keep on each online student.
How much of
A printed file? I keep a lot of information on our students, but part of that is because we have, we do teacher certification, and we are required to have certain documents on our students, so I keep a file with all of that information in it for certification reasons, and I also keep a lot of my communication in that file with them.
I usually just keep a running Word document on a student, how they did on their assignments, just so I can kind of have a remembrance piece there. And then I always make sure that I keep a copy of the graded assignment through the end of the course until the final grades have been received, because every once in a while something can get lost, and then you have to ask for it back. And then that gives you the total picture of their whole learning experience, which is something you don't always have in a traditional classroom. When you turn an assignment back to the student, you don't have it to look at the end of the course. You only have the grade.
I keep everything. They're graded assignments. I created a file for each student, and every graded assignment along with my comments goes in that file, and I'll keep it. Well, right now I still got them, so maybe I'll take last year's off at some point in time. And every time I get an email, I also have a file for each student. And every time I get an email from the student, whether it came in through the portal or if it came in individually, I slide that in there so that I can always go back and look at it. The only thing I haven't figured out how to keep is the forums, and they disappear when they get done with them. Yeah, but
I copy them.
okay,
And create a
yeah,
document.
but
Forums can be archived too, and
Yeah.
your Learning House rep can always pull that back up.
yeah, I always feel the more I have. Now I don't usually have challenges on grades or anything like that, but the more I have, the more comfortable I'll feel, because I can go back and look through an email that came earlier in the year if I'm finding a student that I'm concerned with, that I'm losing. I go, oh yeah, I can remember that she said this was thing, and these kinds of things. So I do keep everything.
With that, I'm going to have to close this workshop. I appreciate our panelists. Thank you very much.